So how do we know when God answers our prayers? How do we know that God is in everything? How do we know? I remember when I was a little child, and as a little child I was taught to pray. And I would do my prayers at the side of the bed, and I would hope. I would hope beyond belief that the prayer would get answered. Sometimes it would, and sometimes it didn't. So as I thought about what I would talk about today, I went for a walk this morning. And in that walk, I had a conversation with God. I said, so God, how can I best tell how people would know if their prayers were answered? And what came to me, through me, and out from me was this idea that I've always been the oneness of God. I've always been my own answer. I've always been my own demonstration of prayer. I just have had my eyes closed. And so God, in this conversation, and it's not like God was outside of me, and I really want you to hear that as I had this conversation. I was asking questions, and the voice was from me talking to myself. And I reflected, and I got the idea so clearly because I remembered back going to Unity Village. And I remember at the time I was in a state of crisis, not knowing where I was going in my life, how I was going to deal with some situations that I was dealing with. And I went for my jog, and it was 5:30 in the morning, and it was dark, and I was on these cart paths on a golf course on 1,400 acres, surrounded by trees and woods and wildlife. And I asked the question at the top of my voice, what am I to do? And I said, I know you're there. I know there's a power greater than I am. I know it's there guiding me, but I need answers. And so I asked the question, and I kept asking the question. I kept asking the question until on hole number 5, I guess God felt I was warmed up enough by then that all of a sudden an answer started coming to me. And it was as clear as if I were talking to someone else. And when the answer came, there was a sense of peace that filled every aspect of my body. There was a sense of peace that filled my mind, so that when I heard the answer, I knew the prayer had been answered. It was a feeling that allowed me to experience my answer. So the idea is, when we pray, God hears more than we say, answers more than we ask, and gives more than we imagine. Because there is this universal law for good, it is always there. So our life is simply a reflection of every thought, every word, every action we have taken to this point. In other words, our life is a prayer. And the life that we've had up to this point is merely mirrored back to us in our experience. So is God answering our prayer? Yes, it is, because it's taking every thought we've had as us, because our mind and God's mind are one. We cannot separate the mind of God. So the mind of God hears everything that we've ever thought, and it takes the accumulation, all of that, and it bursts that into our experience. Now that can be pretty scary, because we say, holy God, I've got a lot of things I put out there that I no longer want to experience. But you see, the beauty of God is it takes that next thought and that next thought and that next thought. And as we build the belief behind these new thoughts, and we build the belief behind the actions that we put behind these thoughts, a new experience starts to come to us. And as we start to shift in that belief, the experience begins to happen. And the more we shift into that belief, the greater the demonstration of that experience. So we are never locked in. So God is always answering our prayer. And see, it hears more than what we're saying. It's not just the words we're speaking. It's what are all the thoughts that we're having each and every moment of every day. So when we wake up and let's say we do our spiritual mind treatment, we do our affirmative prayer, we declare that out there, the law, God, that aspect of law of God that creates, hears that. And then the next minute it hears your phone conversation. It hears the way you may talk to your parents, the way you may talk to your children. It hears any fearful thoughts that you may be having talking to yourself. And the all mind of God, hearing all of that, says, that's the prayer that Lee is asking for. That's the experience that's mirrored back to him. Do you see, it's not about just doing your spiritual mind treatment. It's about living in a state of being already answered. So when we go to and it says God answers more than we ask. You see, when we're asking, we've got limited words. And yet the power and presence of God has heard and felt every feeling, every thought, every dream that we've ever had. All of that is in the infinite mind of God, and it has our name on it. And then as we start to vibrate, as we start to think and act as if we were living that dream, the God presence starts bringing into our experience all of these colors, all of these flavors, all of these tastes, all of these ideas that sculpt and paint this magnificent picture that becomes a demonstration. And so we have an experience and we say, you know, that was better than I ever thought. In reality, it was only better than you thought just now. But all of your life, you've been painting a picture. And all of the magnificence of that picture is there waiting for you. And so we come to the next aspect, that God gives more than we imagine. Because in God, there is no limitation. You see, the human mind has a limitation as to how far. We see that we can't do this because of that. We can't do this because of that person or this event, or I work here or I live here or my ethnic background, whatever it is. But the mind of God has no limitation because there's nothing that opposes God. Because if God is infinite, there is nothing in the world that can possibly oppose God. So we translate that logically saying, if I'm the individualization of the one, then there's nothing in me or outside of me, and there's nothing outside of me that can oppose me from having that which I desire. The only thing that can oppose me is myself. And it's when I dig up the thought, when I dig up that demonstration. I always like to say that when I do spiritual mind treatment, I pray for this or something better. I never limit the power, because if I put it in this way and say, I must have this, then I'm limiting a greater abundance coming to me. So I always go and I always say, this or something better, because that power's desire is to only give that which you ask. There's a real important thing here, because life is not about a personal drama. It's about an impersonal process. You see, when we talk about the law or the mind of God demonstrating, that law is impersonal. It does not care what we ask for. But that law is very personal to us, because that law gives everything that we desire. That law is constantly there to give, to give, to give, to give, whatever you desire. So as you start to focus, as you start to reshift your mind, to refocus, that law is bringing everything into alignment for you to have that experience. But you have to test it. You have to build a belief, because sometimes it's right there ready for us to receive it, and we shift our attention back to something else, and we get the old experience back. So the idea is, how do we maintain? How do we do an iron person triathlon of prayer demonstration so that we stay in it for the long haul with our one goal in mind, and having that one goal in mind, we are now assured that we're going to have that experience. Because as long as we can maintain that focus, it is definite. It is beyond anything we've ever imagined. It must come to us. We have to, though, be willing to face anything and everything that comes into our life in the meantime. This is where the work happens. Because so many times in religious science, in New Thought, the idea comes in, well, let's just be butterflies, and we'll flitter here, we'll flitter there, we won't deal with it. The fact of the matter is, what is in our face in a moment when we're in crisis is telling us this is what our prayer is. Did you hear that? Sometimes our prayer answered is not as bright and cheerful, because remember, the law is impersonal, and it's going to give to us what we're praying for unconsciously. So what we must do is we must take whatever's in our life, we look at it, we acknowledge it, we claim it, we accept this. I am 100% responsible for how I experience this. And the fact of the matter is, no matter what is happening in our lives at any moment, we are always 100% responsible for our experience, because we are the only ones who can choose how we respond. The thing that I want to come to is that in this process of creativity that is always being used in this and every moment, the question I will ask you is, what percentage of it is being consciously directed by you, and what percentage of it is being unconsciously directed? You see, this is what I view as the idea of spiritual enlightenment. Spiritual enlightenment for me is not about just going into meditation and going into the bliss and being at one with the allness of God. If the allness of God wanted to be in the bliss with itself forever and ever, the allness of God wouldn't have come forth and chosen to be in human form, where there is the process of this or that, of contrast, to be able to create, to be able to birth anew. The process of going into the oneness of God is therefore the purpose of realizing our oneness with God, realizing that the power is there already, and then from that now to understand that we have the creative process at our beck and call, and to take it and consciously use it, consciously direct it into creating our life. And realize there are no limitations to this process. I had a real clear example of this last week when I was watching the Ironman triathlon in Houston, because I went down there with a preconceived idea about what a triathlete would look like. And what would I think? Well, it's going to be a lean body, an athletic runner body. There's going to be 0% body fat. You know where I'm going with it, right? You can all imagine the type of athlete we're talking about. You can see them running marathons and triathlons and that type of thing. And you see that is a very limiting thought, because the power that created the universe does not have to have a specific body to do anything. And what I was awakened to was that triathletes come in all sizes and all shapes. They are short, they are tall, they are thin, they are wide, they are muscular, they're not muscular. But the one thing is, their consciousness, the power of God within them, was being directed in the completion of this event. And there were people there crossing that finish line, because Gene and I sat there for 2 hours at the finish line after people had swam 2.4 miles, biked 112 miles, and then run 26.2 miles, 140.6 miles in a phenomenal amount of time. And as we watched, I kept seeing, oh, there's God. Oh, there's a God. And they all looked different. But the key thing about that was they all had the prayer. They demonstrated that prayer by holding on to it every breath that they were in that marathon. From the person, the professional who finished it in 8 hours and 15 minutes, to the last person who finished it, and it would have been 17 hours later, because there was a cutoff to finish the triathlon at midnight of that night. So it would have been 17 hours later. It didn't matter whether you finished at 8:10 or at 17 hours. The prayer was answered, and it was held for the right amount of time. To each of those athletes, they knew that God had answered their prayer. Think into your lives. When have you wanted something so bad you could taste it, you could feel it, you could touch it, you could see it, your imagination could build and build and build upon it? And think, what was it like when you experienced it? It was no different than the imagination of it. The key thing to knowing when your prayer's been answered is to create the dream, adopt the feeling, and live that feeling now. Not ignoring what's happening, but realizing that everything that is happening is a sign of where I need to go next. It's a marker along the way. It's a turn in the path. There are no obstacles. There are only signs that tell us, where can we choose anew? What should we focus on next? How do we deal with it? So when I come back to knowing if God is even listening to my prayer, I simply don't even ask the question. I simply know that I am one with God, that the power of the universe is perfectly centered in me, and I get to use it, and it will respond. And you see, that's where I work on building of faith. I will blindly trust that process because in my past, I've been able to demonstrate, as I know you have, in other areas of your life. So if you can demonstrate in some areas of life, you can demonstrate in others. There's nothing that can stop a demonstration what we might consider this size to a demonstration beyond anything we imagine. Because the power we are dealing with knows no limitation. So regardless of where you've been, regardless of your upbringing, regardless of your state of thought, regardless of your state of body at this time, regardless of the size of your bank account or your pocketbook, regardless of where you are in your education, there is a power within you right now that says, if you focus on that which you desire and you keep that focus, that power will guide and direct you to every person, every event, every situation that will allow that to come forth. And when it comes forth, and you feel it and sense it and know it and see it, you will know that God listened to you. And you will know that it was the God that was in you, that has always been in you, that will always be as you forever and ever. You see, the process of the law may be impersonal, but how we use it is our personal connection and being in the oneness with God. And that, my friends, is an answered prayer.